My husband's best friend told me that she was pregnant with my husband's child and demanded that we divorce. Now he's begging me to take him back. I met my husband while I was there, and we hit it off instantly. He was the man of my dreams. He took me on date nights, made sure I was loved, and gave me big gifts every so often, telling me I was the only one for him. I believed this since we had been together for 4 years, and I'd never had any issues until he introduced his best friend, whom we will call Laura, for privacy reasons. I remember we had an argument because he didn't tell me about her during our whole relationship, and he had been sneaking to see her and hanging out with her at parties when I was sleeping, believing that he was working overtime. This hurt me, and my first thought immediately went to infidelity, but I found all of their texts to be platonic after he willingly told me to look. I thought she was nice at first since when I first met her, she spoke to me politely and said how lucky I was. Until recently, my husband invited me along because it was her mother's anniversary, and her family loved my husband. After all, they had known each other since they were kids. I was okay with this and quite excited since I wanted to make more female friends and have girls' nights out to relieve my work stress. I walked into the house with my husband, and she ran to him happy. She wrapped her whole body around his arm and dragged him to the garden. After being dragged away, he didn't even come to get me, so I went to the kitchen to ask for a drink, where Laura's mother greeted me. She is a lovely person. We generally had a nice talk about our own lives, and she made sure I felt welcome. The whole gathering was mainly nothing special till it got to the dinner. I sat beside my husband, and Laura approached me and asked me to move. I asked why, since the only other spot available was next to her uncle and mother, and since it was about her mother, wouldn't she want to sit next to her? Laura replied, "'Cause I want to sit next to him." I turned to my husband, who nodded and told me to move, saying I was childish and making a scene. At this point, I generally felt my blood boiling. I stood up and told my husband I felt uncomfortable and needed to go to the bathroom and asked where it was. Laura told me, and I left the table, doing breathing exercises and trying to calm down. I went back to the table to sit next to Laura's mother. The whole time, they were laughing, and it seemed that everything he said was funny to her. She kept rubbing his back, touching his arms, and saying how strong he had gotten, and she would look at me smugly. The breaking point was when I put a bit of meat onto my plate, and she said, "Are you going to eat all of that?" And I froze in embarrassment while she and my husband laughed. Her mother stood up for me, saying that it was inappropriate to treat guests with respect, but she ignored it. Laura is beautiful and slim and works out, so coming from her hurts greatly. I stood up, walked out the front door, and called my dad. I told him to pick me up. While I was getting comfortable, my phone flooded with messages from my husband and Laura. I read the messages, and to my horror, my husband was saying I had ruined the whole dinner and that he would stay there for the night. I then read what Laura said, saying I had ruined her night because of my pick-me behavior. My husband came home around 5 p.m. from Laura's, and I immediately said leaving me and staying at another woman's house was disgusting, and he started shouting that I was overreacting again and that I needed to go counseling for my jealousy issues. For about a month, everything was going okay again. Apart from that, my husband got more distant and cold, and I could feel that our argument wedged a gap in our marriage, until I got a message from Laura this morning with a positive pregnancy result and a threat saying we should get divorced, 'cause it's my husband's. My husband came home around 6 a.m., threw his keys on the side, and went upstairs without saying anything to me. I thought this was a little rude, and I walked up after him, telling him we needed to talk, but he said he was tired and needed to sleep, which made me angry because I was serious. I told him halfway up the stairs that I knew about him and Laura, and he looked at me in confusion. I explained my side in the text and what it seemed like, and he laughed. This filled me with so much petty rage because I had had enough of being walked on, so I pushed past him into our room, got a suitcase under the bed, and started packing his stuff for him. He started shouting at me, saying horrible things, but I didn't hear most of it since I was crying uncontrollably and busy ramming every item of clothing he owned. One insult that stood out to me was Crazy Beach, and this is where I snapped and said some horrible things too. I know I called him a lousy husband, but in more of a ruder tone. He left with his suitcase after I said I would get my dad involved if he didn't go. Small update, my husband messaged. He was sorry and wanted to come home and needed to talk about Laura's message. I'm unsure what he will say, but I will message him back to meet me somewhere because I don't want him in my house right now. I'm unsure what he will say, but I'm ready for the lies and gaslighting.